Okay, I think we are live. We are ready to get started on our program today. Thank you so much, audience, for joining us today, where we once again talk about everything related to people and culture. I'm Michelle Beauchamp. The name of our program is Discover and Celebrate Our Uniqueness, and we have a lot of things to talk about today. So I'm so glad you joined us today. And what we want to do is we want to make sure we invite you to put in the comments where are you from and put your name so we can welcome you. And again, we're so delighted to have you here today. And I want to tell you that we have to cut our program short today because I have been sick and I have a doctor's appointment at 11:40 and I could not get it changed. So there we go. We have to get it cut short today. But I'm so glad you joined us today and be sure and chime in and let us know that you're here. And what I want to do too is I want to welcome our special guest speakers. We have Lillian Sy and we have Rebecca Beam. And we were supposed to have John Marble, who is sick today as well. And so I said, John, if you're out there watching us, I'm hoping you're feeling better today. If you have what I have, it's not good. So I'm sorry that you're not feeling good today. And hopefully, you're feeling better. And to our audience, we're really glad that you're here today. And so let me first let our guests welcome themselves and introduce themselves and who they are. Lillian, I see you first. So why don't you tell us who you are and what it is you do?
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca, and good morning. Good morning if you're on the West Coast to everybody. I was born and raised in Malaysia on the island of Borneo and subsequently spent 25 years in the tech industry working globally, after which I started my company, SciComms, about 21 years ago. And I've been working ever since in intercultural communications, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm a coach, consultant, facilitator, and also do a lot of training.
Yeah, you do. You've been busy last week. I remember you were doing a lot of training. So thank you so much. We're really happy that you're here today too. And I see we have Barry here. Thank you, Barry, for joining us, and also Paul Meyer from St. Louis, seeking employment, 16 years DEI experience. So welcome, welcome, welcome. For thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. And so Rebecca, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Rebecca Beam. I'm the founder and CEO of Zavicon. And Zavicon is an employment agency and a consulting firm that focuses on placing individuals with disabilities and those who are neurodivergent in career oriented employment. And we do it in a supported manner. We also work with companies to add this type of hiring to their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Thank you
Okay.
for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So as you can see, yes, and audience, you are going to be in for a treat. So I'm going to start off with this, and that is that there are many diversity dimensions. We know that there is race, right? And here's the thing that's really bothersome to me now too, is that diversity is now seen as a word that people don't want to say. Like it's a bad word. And diversity is beautiful because it makes up all of the best of us. But it is interesting that there is so much opposition now to the word diversity. And so some of the dimensions that people know about, one is race, another is gender, right? And there's a lot of talk about gender. How promotable do women get? How many promotion opportunities do women get compared to males? And just all of the gender. And then there's age. Oh my goodness, this is the generation, the age where we have so many generations working from Gen Zers onto baby boomers, and every single one has different values and different things that we believe in and important to us. So that's also important. Then there's sexual orientation, there's political beliefs, there's religion, a lot of information going on in religion. Um, there's learning abilities and skin color. So there is a lot in diversity. And so today we're going to talk about a lot of that diversity. I see a couple more comments here. So Barbara Ann is here. Thank you, Barbara Ann, for coming and joining us. And then Vacaville, California. We've got New Jersey and Vacaville. So we've got all around, all around. So thank you all for coming, and so happy to have you all here today. And so, in terms of diversity dimensions, that's the gist of it. Now, today we're going to talk about something that some people might not be as familiar with, but we want to talk about diversity overall in the workplace. And Rebecca, I'm going to come to you first, and tell us why is it. I mean, we know why, but let's hear from you and what you hear from employers. Why is diversity in the workplace even a subject, and why should we continue to say it?
That's a great question, Michelle. And we all, I mean, experts know, the studies have shown that the more diverse your teams are, the more productive, the more problem solving occurs, the more innovative, the more creative. And so, one of the areas that we focus on is disability and neurodiversity, and it's oftentimes overlooked in the workplace, although it crosses over all demographics. So our focus is adding disability and neurodiversity into workplaces and raising the awareness that companies, not only from a social aspect, but also from an economic aspect, should open their doors to these communities. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And so what have you done to adapt is kind of the next question I want to ask you about. So open the doors, right? We want companies to open their hearts, we want them to open their minds, and we want them to open the doors so that they can invite people to the table. And it sounds like what you said and what I read over and over and over again is that companies who promote diversity are more profitable, the morale is higher. There are so many reasons why they should do that. But what your company then, Zavicon, started so that you could help increase the ability for people with different abilities to get invited into the doors that are going to be open. So tell us more about what it is you do. And I know you just did a really big event, which you're excited about. So what was that event? And what have you done to adapt? And how are you seeing employers starting to embrace what you're trying to tell them?
Great question. So there's a lot there to unpack, but one of the things is, this kind of movement started, I would say, around 2013, where companies started to pay attention to individuals on the autism spectrum, understanding that they think differently, they can come in and help solve differently. But a lot of it, were just focused on tech, you know, and that, autistic individuals are great in tech. So what, when you say, what have I done to adapt? Well, I opened the doors of Zavicon because I really felt it was important to look at all the skills that are out there and not just pigeonhole individuals who are autistic into tech, because they have skills in all different areas. And then I also wanted to be inclusive of all neurodiversity diagnosis and also all disability. And what I was pleasantly surprised with at Zavicon, I would say 85% of our job seekers are neurodivergent. And of those, a solid 70% are on the autism spectrum. And when we opened our doors and decided to start working across the US in any type of skill set, we look at the human, we look at their abilities and their talents, and we help them navigate their way into meaningful employment using those skills and abilities. I was so pleasantly surprised to see how many individuals have diverse skills. It's not just tech. So we have individuals who love finance, who love marketing, who are very creative. And that was something that, again, so many creatives, animators, game designers, people who want to be in entertainment. So I was having a discussion one day with somebody I collaborate very closely with,
Mm-hmm.
and she too had noticed this and said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we tapped into the studios and the production houses and showed them how talented these individuals are and encouraged them to open their doors? So 2.5 years later, we had our first conference. We got a
Oh,
grant, and it was autism and entertainment. Um,
oh,
we had over 500 people register. We had over 80 companies come.
wow.
Many of the large studios were there, ready to open their doors and attract talent. And so it was just an amazing event. And this just shows that, if you raise awareness and you open the door and you support the organizations to hire differently and to have inclusive practices, it's amazing what can happen. And
Yeah,
we
yeah.
because the unemployment rate is so high for these communities. So that is what we're trying to solve for.
That is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Big congratulations. I know you were very excited about that. And it came to fruition. You had an idea and boom, you put it together and you got such good participation. That's awesome. It sounds like them, what you're saying. And on a side note, audience, I want to make sure to remind you to go on and put comments in and questions that you have as we're going through this conversation. But it sounds like you're saying first, it was a pigeonhole that people they thought that people who were neurodivergent were mostly in the technical area, and what you found out is it's not good to pigeonhole or stereotype because that wasn't true. What was true is that there were many different talents that were available, and you're able to promote those talents now as a result of that. That is awesome. And so when I ask you what are the employers thinking? It sounds like you got really good response. And does that mean that the employers are now going to be able to place people in positions now?
That's correct. That's our hope, is that they will open their doors to more individuals who have different ways of thinking. And, there are definite supports that need to be put in place for many individuals who are neurodivergent. But the supports that we ask employers to put in place for neurodivergent individuals also help their entire team.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like we're asking them to move a mountain to hire someone who thinks differently. We're asking them to just allow for someone who thinks differently. And that could look like companies call it accommodation. We call it success factors at Zavicon. Just understanding how they work best and how they communicate best. And one thing we talked about before we started is how do they learn best, and so structuring your environment to accommodate each individual that works on your team's way of thinking and way of
Mm-hmm.
working.
So in the past, it might have been assumed that because that person was different, that was a bad thing.
Mhm.
And now it sounds like what we're learning and what we understand is that someone who thinks different, let's learn from them. Let's think outside the box, in other words, and get a feel for what it is they're thinking and why they're thinking that way and what can we learn from that person. Is that what you're experiencing?
Absolutely. And studies have shown it that employers who hire neurodiverse workers, they see an increase in innovativeness, in creativity in their environments, productivity. They see an increase in employee retention. That's a huge
Yeah,
expense, is turnover.
that's
And
all.
so if you can hire employees and create higher retention in your organizations, you're saving a lot of money.
Yeah,
Um, so
that's awesome. Okay, well, thank you, Rebecca. Now I'm going to switch gears here now. This is a very diverse panel, and we're talking about something very different. Now we're going to switch to colorism, which Lillian has a lot of expertise in. So I'm going to start by saying, Lillian, this is a term people might not even be familiar with. So what is colorism?
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Michelle. So colorism is a form of discrimination. That's the simple definition. It's a form of discrimination that's based on skin color that disadvantages people with darker skin while privileging those with lighter skin. And it was actually first defined as recently as 1983 in Alice Walker's book, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, where she coined the term, stating that colorism is the prejudicial or preferential treatment of same race people based solely on the color. Now, we now know that colorism happens not just within and across racial and ethnic groups, it happens very often within families like my own. And this is why I decided to really deep dive and do a whole bunch of research about colorism starting about a year ago. And I'm going to share my story. But before I do that, I'd like to give some background about, well, where did interracial colorism come from?
Mm-hmm.
So this actually was perpetuated by European colonists against indigenous and native people on continents such as Europe, Africa, Asia, in addition to North America, as a result of the social construction of race. And that's because constructing the concept of whiteness was a strategy by white Europeans to reinforce the notion of their own superiority, to be perceived as more capable and smart. And of course, this has trickled down to other continents during colonization. So the mere fact that races and ethnic groups have been and still are widely classified by skin color is indicative of the role that skin color has played in how different groups perceive each other. And this is the kicker: the bias within families and communities has a more emotional and lasting impact because it affects our self-confidence from childhood, leaving many, especially girls and women, to feel shame due to put downs, name calling like darky or blackie, and you'll never find a good husband, um, because this affects darker skinned people. You know, for example, in Asia, actually having white skin isn't only about being or looking Western. There's a deeply rooted cultural notion that associates dark skin with poverty and working in the fields. And so I grew up hearing terms like, oh, they're a coolie, they're so dark. And so in Southeast Asia, we call that. And it's also pale skin reflects a more comfortable life out of the sun. And therefore, there's a higher socioeconomic status related to lighter skin.
I tell you what, yeah, we're talking about the impact of it too. Well, and when you and I were talking before, it's so interesting how prevalent this colorism is throughout so many different cultures. I know through the Black culture, it is true that if you have lighter skin and so-called better hair, then you are perceived as being prettier and more beautiful and more ability to get jobs, good jobs, and you know, as you and I were talking, it's true that when you were lighter color slave, then you worked inside the house. If you were darker colors slave, then you worked outside the house. So it is interesting to learn about colorism because it's real. And you talked about the impact. So it makes you feel. And I'm going to show this comment here too. Let's see. Um, Barbara, and oh, she says yes, run, but yeah, she can't wait to watch the balance of it. And here's another message. This is for you, Rebecca. I met with someone from ZavaCon about 7 months ago and didn't hear back. So there you go. There's somebody who knows about you and
Absolutely. Paul,
wants to
reach out to me again. If you didn't hear back, we ask all of our job seekers to please collaborate with us and reach out on a regular basis so that they can we have lots and lots of job seekers that approach us.
yeah,
And
and
we're a
we'll have a
small
slide.
team of people. So the more you collaborate and reach out to
Yeah,
us and stay
we'll
in
have,
touch, the better.
yeah, and we'll have a slide at the end so you can get in touch with Rebecca too.
Right.
So Lillian, back to the colorism and the impact. It's really interesting and heartbreaking to think about the lack of confidence. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What kind of
Mhm.
impact you've seen that it
Mhm.
had?
Yeah, the impact, of course, I did not realize it was because of colorism until decades later, until I started my own research and doing DEI work. And so in my case, as I was thinking about this, preparing for this talk, is I think that in my case, there are three intersectional impacts. Number one was that my father died when I was 12. And compounded on that, and he and I were, you know, two peas in a pod. We just adored each other, but compounded by my mother's bias. And this was really my mother's bias against my then much darker skin. Since living in North America, I've become much lighter, but I was very dark. That led to my dating at 12 when dad died to try to replace the love that I didn't get from my mother, and also family members who also discriminated against me. I mean, my younger brother, and that's the second intersection, is my younger brother called me ABN, African Black Negro. And so my mother's bias also led to her stalking me to my parties, also to my boyfriend's house. I was age 15, and she also asked my high school principal to tell me to stop dating. And so, you know, all this was I was a very lonely teenager. And the third intersection is that for decades, I believed I wasn't good enough, pretty enough, and therefore not smart enough to be sent to college. And my mother even had me work for a year to earn my own airfare to come to America, and also to work while I was going to school, whereas my brother got a free ride. He was finally an MD, And so I'm the only one in our family, and I'm sorry, I'm being vulnerable here, who doesn't have a 4-year college degree. So the good news, though, is that I channeled all this negativity into sports. From a very early age, I played everything with a racket: ping pong, badminton, table tennis, tennis. And also, I was a star track and field.
Okay.
I was actually the junior champion in my high school, winning all the events that I entered. And my dad would have been so proud. But my mother, she didn't even come to any of the sports meets ever.
Oh,
And during the medal ceremonies, even though she was there to present because she was supervisor of all the Chinese schools, she would leave without seeing me get my trophies. And
wow.
subsequently, and this is the kicker, she threw them all away when I left home. So
Oh,
the real impact on me is it left decades of impact on my self-confidence, my self-image, and what I call internalized inferiority. I felt powerless, hopeless. I was hard on myself. I actually considered suicide at 16. I
ugh,
became a perfectionist, which fortunately, being a perfectionist, I used to my advantage. So through hard work, persistence, being at the right place in the right time, having wonderful mentors, boxes, and I call pure dragon luck because I was born the year of the dragon. I've been able to build myself up with my self-confidence and my success. And if I could say I had a pretty successful career in tech, I dare say, as a entrepreneur who's had a business for about 21 years.
wow. I tell you what, Lillian, listening to that story is heartbreaking. And that's the thing to our audience, too. I mean, colorism, you may not have experienced it before, and it might be something new that you haven't heard of. And so now what this does is it is all about education and awareness, right? And from that education and awareness, it's heartbreaking, but it's really exciting to hear how you had enough to dig down deep and find out who you really were, regardless of the stereotypes that were set against you. We just have a few more minutes, but I want to ask you this: you have done some studies about the words black and white. So can you quickly give an overview to that?
Right. And actually, interestingly, Malcolm X and others have pointed out that uh, our language has affected our language, our English language. So the words and phrases using white are considered positive. So think about lily white, white angel, white knight, white lies, and white list. But all the words containing black are considered negative: black ball, black death, black hole, black sheep, black male, black mark,
Yeah,
blackout, blacklist. And
yeah,
so it does impact our language and how we speak, and we don't even think about it.
yeah. And so again, it's reality. I mean, it's really reality. And let's see what Paul says. Diversity can work if all representation, right, Paul, are at the table. Exactly, exactly. We just need people to be at the table, right? Exactly. And Elizabeth said, for sharing your experience, you demonstrate such strength, right? I mean, you are being vulnerable, but it's really making a difference in helping people understand what's involved and what you just said, the difference, the terminology. So what we want to do is pay attention to that, and not judge people against that. And just because of the time, I'm going to have to ask. So I'm going to ask this to you, Rebecca, in terms of how can companies and coworkers and leaders support their teams? I mean, that's what everybody wants, is to be supported. So what kind of recommendation or advice do you have, Rebecca, for that?
Well, the number one thing is asking people how they work best and working with them to set them up for success. Um, it's very interesting because I have a lot of companies come to me who want to build neurodiversity hiring programs. And, the one thing that I advise is the first thing that they need to do is to make sure that their current staff feels comfortable disclosing and that they know that they'll be supported. Um, and there would be no bias or stigma attached to them if they come forward and let their employer know that they are neurodivergent. So making it an inclusive workplace. We talk a lot about universal design and designing your workplaces for all. But at the end of the day, asking someone how they work best or the things that they need to be set up for success, and then working with them to do that is key.
Yeah. Okay. It sounds simple, And it's kind of what you said in the beginning. You know what? Have an open heart, an open mind, and open the door, right?
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And then Lillian, I'm going to come to you and ask you what can organizations and leaders do to reduce colorism? What's your thought on that?
Mhm. So really, it's about education. It's about, as Rebecca said earlier, about raising awareness, right? So leaders must affect systemic change across the larger society by raising awareness and also educating people and especially HR, especially for recruitment, interview panels, and managers. I'd like to invite you to look at your patterns of hiring and promotion of people of color. Say you have a slew of candidates of people of color, do you tend to turn down darker skinned people more
Yeah.
than lighter skin? Analyze the data from some of the complaints about microaggressions and bias and prejudice related incidents against especially people of color. And if you're in academia, who are the kids who are more often identified as troublemakers and why? Are they
Mhm.
perhaps just defending themselves against racist, colorist remarks, bullied due to dark skin? Or are they just retaliating and defending themselves?
Yeah.
So, and more importantly, Michelle, the last thing I want to say is for individuals, people like myself, it's important to learn to heal. Because if I can't heal, I can't talk about it without getting triggered and being
Yes.
upset.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's an important thing. What I have now is I have a slide here that shows our contact information. So I want to encourage you, audience, let Paul make sure and take a picture of this, and you can get in touch with us. And John, again, we're sorry that John wasn't able to be here, but we do ask that you. We definitely want to invite you to come and get in touch with us and reach out to us if you have any thoughts or questions. Um, and with that, I'm going to invite you to come again to another Champ Chat on May 16th, where in recognition of mental health awareness, we're going to talk about mental health abilities. So with that, I'll put this slide up again. And I want to thank our audience for coming. And let me see what Paul said. Um, Worked with 8 inclusive hiring, interviewing, currently looking for work, and recently. Okay. Sigh. Okay. All right. All right, Paul. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we need for the employers and the leaders and the coworkers to all be aware. And what I think is that in this less than 30 minutes, we have really educated and helped you become more aware of things that you might not have known about. And it's important to not ignore it. Kind of what we've said before. We can't ignore it. We can't say, "Oh, that's not true in our company." You need to look around and
Mhm.
like Lillian said, take a look at what your practices have been, your patterns have been, and be honest with yourself. Because if you're honest with yourself, then we can grow from that, right? So that's what this is all about, is just helping us grow. So with that, I've got to scurry off to go to the doctor's appointment. And Lillian and Rebecca, I want to thank you all so much for being here today and being guests, all the preparation that you did prior to this. Thank you so much. And to our audience, we want to thank you so much for joining us today, and just really appreciate the support that you give on a monthly basis, and hope that once again this has been helpful for you to learn and to grow. And thank you so much. And with that, I will end the call.
Thank you, everybody, for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thanks, Michelle.